Oh, hi. I'm Marc, an art teacher, a professional artist, and in this new episode of my ongoing series, YouTube Art School, I'll be practicing drawing a bunch of characters from imagination, and also I'll show you how I actually go about constructing them. Maybe it'll help you do the same, maybe not. Alright, class is in session. Pay attention. So today I'm going to show you how I construct my characters, my female characters. Construction is a key fundamental in art, and this is going to be essential when drawing from imagination. It's the very first step. Now this is my way of creating the female body, and most experienced artists will have their own favorite way. It might be similar, or it might be completely different. Either way, you can think of this as my own recipe, my personal recipe for drawing bodies in different angles or different poses. This is not unlike your mom's chocolate chip cookie recipe. In a sense, you might like it as it is, when it's passed down to you. But after, trying it a couple of times, maybe your own preferences will come into play, and then you'll want to tweak a couple of things. Make it your own. Either way, it's always easier when you start with a recipe. The only thing to really keep in mind here is that this particular recipe requires you to have a good amount of anatomy knowledge and human proportions, so some study is required for this to be of any value. Also, I'm planning a follow-up video at some point for the male version, so let me know in the comments below if there's any interest. All right, let's get right into it. What we're going to start with here is kind of just a basic construction for something that doesn't have any pose or anything like that, so that we can figure out the correct proportions and all of the reference points and guidelines that I include with my construction. From there, I'm going to reuse that to draw a couple of characters in different poses using the same construction, of course, and then we'll clean all of those up and essentially end up with a bunch of finished drawings that hopefully will look pretty good. And of course, the construction here is meant as a quick way to visualize the final result without actually committing to any detail. So here we're always going to be starting from the head, because for most of my characters, they'll be 7 to 8 heads tall. So of course, if this is my unit of measurement, I should probably start with it. But then yeah, from here, the halfway point of the entire head, we're going to have eyes/eyebrows, and the nose and the mouth, little ears. Moving down to the rib cage, this is going to be just like a slightly bigger ellipse, but not twice as big. And then doubling that distance, we're going to find the crotch right down here, which at this point we have kind of half a body, because the crotch usually lands at around the halfway point of the entire height of the character for ideal proportions. And then chopping that distance about in half, we're going to find where the knees are, and right where the crotch is usually where I'll place my hands, because when the hands are relaxed on the side of your body, they should just about cover your crotch pretty well. So kind of like an easy way to remember it. All right, and from here we can kind of connect the dots. So I like to have big ellipses here for the forearms, then we can trace the outside for everything else in here. And something else that helps to measure distances is to have kind of this symmetry line going straight down the center of your character. This way it makes it easier to measure, like from the distance here all the way to the side, is it similar to the other side, that kind of stuff. Now, one thing that I should probably mention here is that most of these guidelines I will omit when drawing characters, and that's the idea, right? So you start with a lot of guidelines, something to make sure that everything is where it should be, but then with repetition and practice, you kind of start to see them on the canvas, or in your head before or without having to draw them. So everything that I'm doing here is a little more than what I would usually use. All right, since we're down here at the legs, I also like to add a little bit of an ellipse here on the side of the leg, just to indicate the head of the fibula. And for the feet, usually I'll simplify them with 2 ellipses in perspective, in the correct perspective. 1 ellipse for the heel, 1 bigger ellipse for the toes. So on her right leg here, you can see both of them are firmly planted on the ground. And then on the other side, the toes are on the ground and the heel kind of lifted off the ground a little bit. Now, still missing a couple details up here. I also like to continue the line here of the shoulders, going into the clavicles, and indicate the start of the ribs here. So basically splitting that big ellipse, that big egg shape, in half, more or less. The distance right here, that should be the length of our sternum. That's also the length of the pectoral muscle usually. So let's quickly indicate where those would be. Belly button, trapezius. And now we're just missing a couple extra details around the hips, and we should be pretty much done. On the outside here, this is going to be as wide as the hips ever get. This is basically what this line here represents. And so from there, I'll kind of take this distance here and split it in half, and that's where the obliques will end. But also I like to draw 2 little ellipses in here representing the tip of the hip bone, and right above that we'll typically have the most developed part of the obliques right about here. And then from there, we can kind of trace a line right into the pubis. Then taking the triangle that's kind of left there and then splitting that in half just as such, making sure that the peak of this curve here kind of points straight up at those hip bones. Now, before I draw a bunch more characters using the same construction here, maybe a couple of explanation for some of the details in there. Notably, maybe the reason why I draw these, it just makes it, for me at least, a little bit easier to see them in perspectives. And then that line right here, that's where the leg attaches onto the hips. And it's also the line where the fold will happen when the leg is bent. Let's say you lift your knee, that's where the fold will be. And then quickly to explain kind of the weird shape here at the legs, basically you have the upper leg, so the thighs, continuing and then contouring the kneecap. And then just the same way, you can kind of take the line of the calves and continue them into the shape of the upper leg. Now, the reason this is tilted towards the outside of the leg is to help suggest a little bit of the anatomy of the leg. So on the inside, typically we're going to have the vastus medialis, which will insert a little bit lower on the leg compared to the vastus lateralis here on the outside, which attaches a little higher. So now that we've laid out the structure, let's go in and do a bunch more. Practice makes perfect. And it's always helpful, at least it is to me, to see how the recipe is applied. So let's see how it holds up in different poses. Now, when it comes to the rest of the video, it's going to be more of a class demo, think of it this way, because I've already said everything I needed to say here. All I'll be doing from now on is just applying what I constructed, drawing a bunch of different characters and a bunch of different poses using this construction method, this construction recipe. And so each of the constructions on average took about 5 minutes, and I've sped it up 10 times. So it should be down to about 30 seconds. And the same goes for the drawing phase 2. But if you want to see it a little bit slower, I've made sure to record a video in 60 frames per second. So if you want something that's a little slower, you can go ahead and change the video player speed to 25%. And also I'm going to say a couple of words towards the end of the video, so you can skip directly to that if you prefer. But I think the drawing phase is probably the best part of the video, so I do hope you check it out. Oh, and one last thing, I completely winged those characters, so I didn't check against, real references, which is something I don't recommend. Always use references. But anyways, yeah, I was feeling confident, so I wanted to test myself, test my knowledge, and I just wanted to mention that because you will see a couple of anatomy issues, or maybe you won't, but if you know your anatomy, you should be able to spot a couple of things left and right. And so normally I would go back in there once I'm done, look up a couple of references for the bits and the areas where I'm not 100% sure, and then I would kind of do a second pass of the final drawing, refining everything and making sure everything works the way that it should. All right, I'll be right back. still there? Oh, hi. So awesome to see that you made it all the way to the end of the video. So that was a pretty good session. That was a pretty good drawing session. And I hope that you enjoyed it. Maybe picked up a trick or two. And I think the main takeaway for this video, hopefully at least, is that construction is important. But not only that, that's obvious. Maybe more that there are many ways to approach construction, and this is one of the ways to approach constructing the female body. This is my recipe, like I said. I'm sure there's a million more out there, because eventually most artists end up developing their own recipe or tweaking somebody else's to make it their own so that it fits their workflow better. I hope that maybe some of these things here you'll be able to pick up and apply on your own drawing. Maybe adopt this recipe, or maybe just part of it, or maybe you have a completely different style for which it doesn't really apply. But anyways, this video has been going for long enough, and there's really just one more thing that I wanted to end with, which is